We were hanging out with our two new friends, husband and wife. Let's say their names are John and Mary. They decided to camp at Todd Lake Recreation Center, which is in George Washington National Forest, and invited us to spend time at their campsite, have a few beers, and relax by the campfire. My partner and I decided we weren't up for overnight camping, but were down to hang out for a bit. The recreation center was only 45 minutes from home, so we thought we could drive if we didn't have but a few drinks, ate food, and chilled for a couple of hours. So we get there around 4:30 p.m. and have camp snacks, sandwiches, chips, nothing special, and some alcoholic drinks. We wander down to the lake and let their dog swim. Then we decide to head back to the campsite and start a fire. I knew we weren't staying the night, so I kept track of how many drinks I had and the food I ate to ensure I was suitable for the drive later. In total, I had like 5 drinks the entire night. Not to sound like an alcoholic or anything, but 5 drinks do not explain what happened to us that night. I can handle my alcohol, and am responsible while drinking by pacing myself, eating food and drinking water in between beverages. So we're hanging by the fire with John and Mary, and next thing you know, John says, "Hey, do you guys want to walk down to the lake?" And we respond, "Yeah, sure, let's do it." The campsite has a short walking path to the lake, probably half a mile away. It should only take minutes to get there. Now this is when it gets weird. I look at my cell phone and see it's 8:30 p.m. and decide to put my phone in the car before we walk down to the lake because I don't want to lose it. The next thing I knew, I woke up in the woods, passed out on the ground on a trail with my partner, in the middle of George Washington National Forest. We were an hour away from the campsite, and John and Mary were nowhere to be found. My partner was on his back with his head turned to the side, and I was laying halfway on the moss, and the other half on him with my head turned to the side. Almost as if we were placed perfectly. We were lost, and both felt extremely confused and sick. We both started throwing up, and had to take breaks walking out to try and find John and Mary's campsite. It took us an hour to get back, and it appeared we had hiked an hour outside of the recreation center. We both had zero recollection of how we got there, why we were passed out in the middle of the woods at night, and why the 5 seltzer with food over a multiple hour span made either one of us be so sick and lose memory at the same time. My partner was completely disoriented, started screaming for help. I was begging him to be quiet because I felt so sick and had no idea where we were. I needed a minute to collect myself and get my bearings to try and hike out of our current situation. Something to know about us is we both are avid hikers and backpackers, and are very comfortable outdoors in nature, even alone. However, at that moment, I was so thankful I didn't wake up in the woods at night on a trail alone. Thankfully, he was with me. The entire time, we felt like we were being watched as we tried to find our way back. It was unsettling. I was telling my partner when we were trying to find our way back to the campsite, something felt very wrong. And when we got back, we needed to get in the car and leave. I felt it in my bones, but I couldn't pinpoint exactly what happened. We were both utterly shocked that we somehow both conveniently blacked out simultaneously. I know what you all are thinking. Were we drugged? We felt that too. But why would John and Mary, our supposed friends, drug us? And why would they drug us and carry us deep into the forest? It doesn't add up. We finally made it back to the campsite, and I first opened my car and grabbed my phone to see what time it is. It was 2:30 a.m. My heart sank. How did this happen? How did it go from 8:30 p.m. when we were walking down to the lake, which was half a mile or less from their campsite, to 2:30 in the morning? Neither of us liked not knowing what happened to us in that lost time. So before we decided to leave, my partner knocked on their tent and said, "Hey John, we're leaving. What happened, man? We need to get out of here, something's off." John then replies, "Where's Mary?" And my partner and I look at each other concerned and say to John, "What do you mean, she's not in the tent with you?" And John replies, "No, I thought she was with you two." That's when we all decided to search for Mary. John said the last thing he remembered was we were all hanging out by the fire and asked if we wanted to go down to the lake. And then hours later, we woke up underneath the picnic table at the campsite, not remembering how he got there. However, something seemed fishy, and he was far too relaxed. We found Mary down the trail to the lake, slumped over, asleep in the woods near the campsite. Neither remembered what happened and why we all ended up in these places. No one can remember what happened for those few hours. It was misty, dark, and foggy on the mountain, and I was shivering, teeth chattering, feeling sick, and just ready to go home. We got in the car and returned to our house, but it took a while to settle enough to sleep. When we spoke to John the next morning, they laughed it off and said, "Haha, maybe we shouldn't drink so much next time we hang out." I remember all of us hanging by the fire and then mentioning us going down to the lake, but I stayed back to deal with the dog, and you three went down there. John changed his story from what he said the night before. Something didn't sit right with me. The Todd Lake Recreation Center was almost empty. We only saw one other family camping that night, and they weren't anywhere near our campsite, which was also odd. My partner and I don't think we drank enough to the point it would cause us to black out, especially at the same time. So what did happen? We were sore and a little cut up, but our only thoughts were, this must have been something paranormal, or they did drug us. I started to get flashbacks of memory, and all I remember was John's face on the beach, then black. Did aliens abduct us? Was it something from Appalachian folklore? Like a Mothman or some bizarre creature? Did we all drink too much? Did we get drugged? My partner lost his phone that night, so I called a ranger the following Monday, and they said they found it in the woods, busted up between campsites 5 and 6. But John and Mary were camping at campsite 1. The ranger mailed it back to us because I didn't want to drive back there. I had a horrible pit in my stomach. The phone never turned back on. Even though the front of the screen was perfectly intact, it was only the back of the phone that was busted. A part of me doesn't want to know what's on that phone. The next day my partner was violently ill, and I was shivering with teeth chattering and chill bumps all day. We honestly probably should have gone to the hospital. In my 30 years, I've never experienced something like this, and to this day, we're skeptical about meeting our new friends or having new people enter our lives. Either way, we are both so grateful we made it home safely that night, and we have each other. I grew up in Orange County, California, but there were some real wild areas around us, believe it or not. In high school, we went out to this place called Black Star Canyon in Cleveland National Park, a big, densely wooded area of oak that stretches from OC to San Diego, almost to the border. Even contains a Marine Corps base camp. Anyways, we had been told it was haunted growing up. Turns out the true story is that there was a tribe up there that was slaughtered in the 1800s by hired fur trappers because they kept stealing the Mexican ranchers' horses for meat. Enough said for a bunch of dumb high schoolers, so we planned a night hike to this place. My friends and I did stuff like this all the time, but I consider myself pretty skeptical, and luckily most of us were pretty level-headed. This area is well known for mountain lions too, so we were all on guard, and in agreement to turn around at any sign, even if just one of us wanted to. So the way the trail works, you park at a forestry gate, and start to walk along old asphalt narrow road that's mostly dirt from when there were sparse horses in the 50s and 60s, before the floods washed them out and land was committed to NFS, eventually turning to a full hiking trail. Along this road is a line of barbed wire, as well with all kinds of signs warning you not to cross. So here we were, typical idiots, walking down a road on a hardly slivered moon-pitch black night after midnight, and not using our flashlights to add to the flare. Well, as we go and venture deeper and deeper down this road, which we've never been on, mind you, I keep seeing what appears to be a cowboy leaning on the wooden fence post, holding the barbed wire. Just kinda leaning on it, but distinctly looking at us. I'm talking full-blown cowboy brimmed hat, just leaning, but it's just a silhouette out the side of my eye. And every time I look straight on it, there's nothing. I keep telling myself I'm logical and push it off as a trick of the eyes to keep my cool. But I keep seeing this guy every 10 or so posts, but don't say a thing to the guys. We get to a point where we've been walking for over an hour and debating on heading back just because of the time. Just then my friend goes, "Yeah, and I keep thinking I'm seeing a cowboy along the fence line." I no shit felt my stomach drop out of me. I couldn't believe it. These were plain wooden fence posts, maybe a typical 4 foot or so tall, with mostly fields behind them. No way that looks like a person. So I open up about it also, and we all agreed to turn around. Just then, my other buddy starts flipping out, ripping his shirt off, screaming about getting stung. We're all kind of confused, looking at him like he's crazy, but he insists a bee or something just stung him. So we turn on lights on his back to look and watch as 3 distinct scratches from stretching from one shoulder diagonal to the opposite hip, even drawing blood. We were done, needless to say, after that, but made it back to the car without further incident. You can probably argue the shadow was coincidence in the dark and shapes playing tricks, sure, I'll give you that. But throwing the scratch in a way that we watched happen right as we were discussing the cowboy, and in a way he couldn't do to himself, and none of us was standing in a circle to do it to him, there's something going on. I live in a small town in North Italy, a valley between our typical old mountains, so just behind my home there's lots of hikes. I always lived here and I like mountains, plus I'm getting in shape so the terrain is ideal, especially because I'm really familiar with it. So last summer I was walking my usual route when I thought I could try to have a short hike before sunset, and I took a route. Now I don't know if you're familiar with Italian ground, but there aren't these big spaces and long distances typically of the US, I imagine. Picture the average small town of 2,500 people, starting from the bottom in a 2 to 3 hour hike you're on top of the mountain, and the route I took was about 30 minutes to arrive halfway the mountain, to a big Christian cross and a nice view. I was with my dog, a well-trained Spitz, a nice company with good instincts that I trust. He's a working dog more than a pet, despite his size. So we took the path and started making our way up, nice and relaxed, but active as we didn't have too much light time left. I just figured that if the light went low, I'd just turn around and head home. No chance of getting lost. Woods immediately engulf us. Pretty dense, but it's the norm. Not even 15 minutes of walking, and I'm paralyzed with this overwhelming sense of dread. The woods are completely silent. My skin crawls up just thinking about it. Even my dog stops, anxious. I just couldn't understand what was scaring me so much in the sudden silence. I couldn't move a muscle. I read The Gift of Fear, and the only time I didn't listen to my guts, I lost my spleen in an accident. So wide-eyed and hyper-alert, I forced myself to move and noped out of there. It was like my brain was screaming, if you stay here, you'll die. Walking back, I couldn't stop the urge to continuously look behind me. At some point I was practically running, and I kept thinking that if I sprained an ankle there, I would die. The dog seemed relieved when we had turned back, and he kept looking behind too. When we finally made it out of the woods and back on the road, I felt a wave of relief and ran all the way back home from the adrenaline I had. To this day, I don't know what happened and I haven't gone back.